video I'm going to demonstrate use of a technique called CSS Sprites, which I learned years ago from a really good website called A List Apart. It's alistapart.com. So fantastic site with lots of good tutorials. Now a CSS Sprite is really a CSS controlled image map. And if you don't know what an image map is, that's really okay. Traditional forms of image maps are they're still around, but they've been phased out. A lot of sites are using Flash to create an image map style effect, but you can do it without Flash using some CSS techniques that are pretty cool. And the best way to show you what I'm talking about when I say CSS Sprite is just to give you an example of one. So here's an example of a CSS Sprite, or a CSS image map if you prefer. I've got an image, and it's got 4 people on there. Each person is going to be a hyperlink to their email or to their bio page or something like that. And upon mouse over, they go from a black and white to a blue tinted color version. There we go. So traditionally this technique is done with a couple images, several images, using a JavaScript technique on mouse over event handlers. And it's not a tough way to go. It's quite easy and extremely common to use the JavaScript on mouse over effect, but this is a different way. One of the benefits of using this CSS technique is that instead of having multiple images, there is just one image that gets loaded as soon as the page loads, so the action is extremely quick. The other good thing is that if somebody doesn't have images capability or CSS capabilities, this menu right here would simply be a bulleted list. I know that's kind of weird to think about, but check this out. Okay, I'm going to go up to my web development toolbar, CSS, and I'm going to disable all styles. And here we go. There are my people contacts. It's simply a bulleted list. Each person is a hyperlink. I'll go back to CSS and re-enable my styles, and we have this again. So it's really just a bulleted list disguised to look like an image map. Really kind of neat. So let's go ahead and get started. Here's my blank page. I've got a blank page all set up, and I don't have any styles in there. In fact, there's nothing in the body section of my page either. So there's a lot to do, so I'm going to type a whole bunch of stuff at once. Okay, here's what I've set up so far. My web page now has a headline 1, and it has an unordered list, or a bulleted list. My bulleted list is uniquely identified, just in case. What if I had multiple unordered lists throughout my web page? This one is uniquely identified. Now within my bulleted list I have 4 list items, or 4 bulleted items. Each of those bulleted items are uniquely identified. In this example, I'm going to do the one that I just showed before, where I have 4 people in 4 quadrants, and you can mouse over each of them to get a separate link. So right now I simply have a bulleted list, and if I look at this on my web page, this is what I've got. My headline 1 and my bulleted list where each individual is a hyperlink. Haven't done any styles yet, so let me take care of that now. I'm going to do all the styles up here in the embedded in the page, in the head section of my web page, as opposed to an external style sheet. Okay, this is my first CSS rule. Okay, I've got a lot of declarations in here, but it's still only one rule. This particular rule is controlling my identified people list. Now if you remember, my unordered list is ID equals people, so this rule is controlling the entire bulleted list overall. I've done a couple things here that I'm going to correct in just a second. For instance, I've given my unordered list a 2-pixel thick solid red border. I'm going to get rid of that pretty soon. I'm doing it now just so you can visualize exactly what's happening. I've set the width of my bulleted list to be 180 pixels. Now I didn't just pull that number out of my hat. That 180 pixels is the width of the image that I'm working with. Now the height I've set at 406 pixels, and that is the current height of the image that I'm working with. I'm going to be changing that number in a little bit too. The background image of my bulleted list is the image in question. I've called it CSS Sprites. It's a JPEG file. I'm positioning that background image 0 pixels on the top left corner. Background repeat no repeat is going to prevent my background image from tiling. Most background images will automatically repeat over and over again, tiling. I don't want that to happen here. The margin of my bulleted list is 0, the padding is 0, my text will be centered. list style type none. Bulleted lists by default have bullets, so this declaration tells the browser don't display bullets with my unordered list. And position is relative. This really doesn't have an immediate effect, but if you remember from one of my previous videos, if you position something absolutely, it works better if you position something absolutely inside of a container that's been positioned relative. Well, our unordered list is going to be positioned relative, but our individual list items will be positioned absolutely. So this is what I have in my CSS so far, and this is the effect it has on my web page. Notice you can just barely see it, but there are my centered list items, Leah, Eric, Ann, and Bobby, and there is no bullet. You might not be able to tell, but you just have to take my word for it. Notice that the height of 406 pixels shows the true height of this image, but I don't want people to see both portions of my image at one time. I only want them to see, right now, the black and white portion. So I'm going to adjust my height by dividing it in half, 203 pixels. There we go. Now they can just see the top portion of that image. And my unordered list is 180 pixels wide by 203 pixels tall. That only gives it enough room to display the top portion of this 400 pixel tall background image. So that's what I have so far. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to control all 4 list items equally within my people unordered list. So to do that, I'm going to use as a selector list items within my people list. Okay, I've set up a little bit of redundancy here, but I'm confirming again that my list items will not have a bullet style. I'm also making sure that, oh, that's a typo there. Their margins are set to 0 pixels, and this one's pretty critical. I'm just making sure list items, by the way, are automatic. They are already a block element, but I'm just confirming that my list items will be block elements. I'm going to be very soon giving each of my list items their own width and height characteristics and their positions, and you can control the width and the height of block elements quite easy, so I'm just kind of confirming things. These particular declarations for this rule, this CSS rule, will not have a noticeable impact on my web page. There we go. Now the next order of business is to control the links that are within each of my list items, and I'm going to control all of these equally. If you recall, back here on my unordered list, each list item contains a hyperlink. There it is. There's the anchor tag. Each of them has an ahref leading to some web page. So there's an inline anchor in each of my list items. Well, I'm going to control all of them equally. So, Leah. Now you remember they're all identified. So I have a list item identified as Leah. So I've got Leah, and there's an anchor tag inside of that. Eric, there's an anchor tag inside of that. Ann, anchor tag inside of that, and Bobby, an anchor tag inside of that. All of the anchors in each of these are going to be formatted separately. They are all going to be display block. Now that's pretty critical because anchor tags are an inline element, so this is telling the browser, hey, these hyperlinks are going to be block elements, not inline elements. They're going to be 90 pixels wide and 100 pixels tall. What that's explaining is that each list item, each individual on here, so Leah for instance, 90 pixels wide, which makes sense because the whole image is 180 pixels wide, so half of it is 90 pixels wide, and of course the whole thing is about 203, so I'm estimating about 100 pixels tall, roughly. We might be able to fine-tune some of these numbers later on, but those are good numbers to go with, I think. Margin 0 pixels, text decoration none. This gets rid of that underline effect.